All righty, here we go. Okay, welcome back to Salty Saints. My name is Hayden Holm, and today I have a big panel of gentlemen. We've got Sam at Through the Mist. We've got David from Sword of Laban. Go check out their YouTube channels and subscribe. We've got Jeff Borders with us, the author of the Antichrist Playbook. And we also have with us today Richard Brunson, who is the author of... Now, remind me the title. It's the Events of the Second Coming. Before the Second Coming. That's right.
Yep.
And why we brought Richard on today? Well, first of all, there's a lot of things going on in the news. A lot of stuff happening, and I recently saw a Ward Radio live stream where you casually mentioned, you slipped in that you believe that we are now in a season of persecution for the saints.
Yeah.
And then you kept going. It grabbed my attention just like a sombrero meme. And then you guys passed right over it. And I was like, hey, what's going on? I want to hear a little bit more about that. So I decided to reach out to Richard and see if we can pull out a little bit more information on that. What do you mean when you say the saints are in a season, entering a season of persecution? What does that look like? What can we expect? So we'll start there. Before we get to those questions, though, why don't you give us a little bit of background on your book and what you're doing?
Sure. Okay, so my book is Before the Second Coming. It was published by Cedar Ford in May of this year, hot off the press. So my background, I've spent the last 25 years or so studying the Second Coming. It all started when I was in high school. I was reading a book called The Millennial Messiah by Bruce R. McConkie. And, he's talking about the Battle of Armageddon and this army of 100 million people coming to Jerusalem to wipe out the Jews. And there's these two prophets that, keep them at bay for 3.5 years and call down fire from heaven. And I'm just reading this. I'm thinking, like, how the heck does he know all this? This is amazing. I look at the footnotes and like, oh my gosh, he's quoting the Bible. Holy cow, this is in the Bible, right? So I gotta read this. So I, jump over to Revelation and Ezekiel and of course didn't understand a word of it, obviously. So needed some commentaries and things like that to get going. But that's kind of where the passion kind of started. On my mission, I met someone who was also very interested in the signs of the times, and we had a lot of conversations, and he taught me a lot of cool things that really got me going as well. So when I got home from my mission in 2004, I decided this is a topic I wanted to take seriously. So I, studied as much as I could and read everything I could about the Second Coming and the signs of the times, and eventually started writing this stuff down, and I really didn't have any intention of publishing a book. It was just kind of more for my own study. But people liked it. People thought it was interesting, so I decided to go for it, and Cedar Fort picked it up, so couldn't be happier, and now we're doing the book tour. So thank you for having me.
100%. Yeah, that's awesome to hear that you've got a passion for it. I know so many people that have a passion. They go kind of into these little rabbit holes. They're they're the members of the church in your local ward that kind of have like a little crazy look in their eye, but they never go to the write a book step. They always have like a bunch of jumbled thoughts. They're like, ooh, I think this, and they have like a couple of theories here. But if you look into it, they kind of start to crumble a little bit. So that's great that you actually organize your thoughts, you put them down into a book, and you've got it all written down. That's fantastic. So let's get into the season of persecution, because if there's anything that I feel after the Michigan shooting is that perhaps we may be in a season of persecution. Maybe this is the beginning of it. So I'd like to hear a little bit more of your thoughts on that.
Okay, so let me set this up a little bit, just so you kind of understand why I feel like we are potentially in a season of persecution. I had two purposes when I wrote my book. One, I wanted to place the signs of the times in their most likely chronological order. And the number two goal is I wanted to avoid generalities and really talk specifics. And so those are kind of the two goals. But the first one was placing them in chronological order. So my first goal was, okay, well, let's list out all the signs of the times. Which one happens first, right? And that's a fun exercise if you were ever to do that and take the hundreds of signs that we have and let's try to start arranging these. So eventually, the most exciting part for me when researching the book was finding these things that I called hooks, and that was just a term that I made up. But a hook
Yeah.
was a clue that helped me determine whether one sign occurred before or after another sign, right? So
Oh, I
an
see.
example, just a quick example. Um, there's a verse in Joseph Smith Matthew that says, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun shall be darkened," right? So that's a
Right,
hook
right.
to me. It tells me that there's tribulation and then the sun will be darkened after that, right? And so if we keep going with all these signs, then eventually we can kind of make a storyline or almost like links of a chain. So that's what I kind of did. So the first sign that I determined that was going to happen from like here forward occurs in First Nephi. So in his vision, he's going along and he sees our day. Well, first of all, he sees the founding of America, right, and the restoration of the gospel coming forth of the Book of Mormon, and then he gets to our day. And let me just read what he says. He says this. This is First Nephi chapter 14, verse 12. He says, "I beheld that the church of the Lamb, who were the saints of God, were also upon all the face of the earth." So to me, this tells me that he's describing something very similar to the day that we're living in right now. Like our church right now is in almost every nation in the world. We have stakes everywhere. We have temples popping up everywhere. And
Yeah.
so this, to me, it really kind of describes us. And Heber C. Kimball, which I'll talk about in a minute, also had a vision of our day. And he says something very similar. And then he kind of echoes what Nephi says after this, kind of similar language as well. So that tells me that they're talking about the similar time periods. So after Nephi records that there's saints in all the nations of the world, this is what he says. And this is what I think is the time period that we are either entering into, or perhaps we've been transitioning into this. But he says, right after this, he says, "I beheld that the great mother of abominations did gather together multitudes upon the face of all the earth, among all the nations of the Gentiles, to fight against the Lamb of God." So, what does this fight entail, right? Well, Nephi doesn't tell us. He just says there's a fight, and we're in this fight, and there's people fighting us. What does that mean? Well, he doesn't say, but like I said, there's been other prophets who have seen our day in vision, and Heber C. Kimball was one of them, and he described this fight not as a fight, but he described it as persecution. And in his account, in his vision, he said that an army of elders will be sent to the four quarters of the earth to seek out the righteous. That sounds a lot to me like what Nephi described in that original verse where he says, "I saw saints in all the world," right? And then Heber C. Kimball said that he said persecution comes next, and all true Latter-day Saints will be tested to the limit. Many will apostatize, and others will be still, not knowing what to do.
Yeah.
So,
And is that the same quote that starts off somewhere along the lines of, "In that day there will be saints, and it will be impossible to tell the face of a saint from the face of a sinner"? Is that the quote that you're referring to?
I don't think that's the same account. No, I think
got
that
you.
might be different.
And he talks that there will be a test, a test, a test, and he says that like three
Okay.
times in that quote. But he is
Interesting.
talking about second coming in that he specifically says like there will be a day, specifically referring to like Salt Lake, when it's impossible
Yes.
to tell the face of a saint from the face of a sinner.
So his phrase is Salt Lake. Well, at least in this account, his phrase is
Right.
Salt Lake will be classed among the wicked cities of the world.
Right.
So whether he said that, what you're describing at another time, I don't know. But in this vision, yes, that is the same vision where he describes Salt Lake as being among the wicked cities of the world, which is interesting. So he describes a period of persecution. Let me just read a couple other quotes of other prophets and apostles who have talked about this as well. Of course, Joseph Smith said that the standard of truth has been erected. No unhallowed hand can stop the work from progressing. Persecutions may rage, mobs may combine, armies may assemble, calumny may defame, right? But the truth will go forth. So was he talking about this time period as well? Possibly. Let's see. Let me see if I can find a couple others. Elder Orson Pratt said there will come a time when the Gentiles will persecute God's servants and his people all the day long. That was his quote. Joseph Smith prophesied again. He said, then will persecution rage more and more, for the iniquities of men shall be revealed. And those who are not built upon the rock will seek to overthrow this church.
Yeah.
Let's see. Heber C. Kimball, later on in his quote, he said that this persecution will cause the saints to cry unto the Lord day and night until deliverance comes. That's an interesting phrase. It suggests that our patience and faith is going to be tested to the limit. Let's see. Elder Orson Pratt said this. He said, the Lord may bring us into greater tribulation than that which we have hitherto had. So think about all the persecutions that the early saints had to endure. And here Elder Orson Pratt saying that we may face greater tribulation than that. President J. Reuben Clark said, we of this church will have more sacrifices to make and more persecutions to endure than we have yet known. And so, so there's lots of prophets and apostles
so there is a lot of persecution talk. So they do say the saints will be persecuted before the second coming. So that's the piece there. You're saying that, so the connection you're making is that in Nephi, we understand that once the church is worldwide, once it's global, at that point, persecution will come. Is that what you're saying?
That's kind of how I read it, yeah.
Okay.
So, and I've always kind of speculated, where's this persecution going to come from, right? I have 3 different theories. And I can run those by you. Obviously, this is just me speculating. This is not me.
For sure. All of our ties are flipped over our shoulders right now. This is nothing too official. That's great.
Okay.
Let's speculate away on that.
So the first one.
Before you get there, does it have something to do? I'm gonna take a guess. Does it have something to do with the sons of Zion, and it will start upon my house, like the sons and the daughters of Zion? So almost like judgments pouring out from God. Similar to the chapters we read in Isaiah about the tinkling things will be taken away, and where there was hair there will be a scab and things like that.
Could be. In my book, I have a chapter on destruction, because it's interesting. Nephi, right after this persecution stage, describes a period of the wrath of God being poured out. And I associate that with other forms of destruction that have been talked about elsewhere that kind of fall along the same storyline. So it could be. In my book, I place those things that you're describing as this destruction phase that kind of follows the persecution phase. So my 3 theories, number 1 would be things that are happening from our neighbors, like what happened in Michigan, right? This is just someone who didn't like our church and wanted to send a message that whatever that was, and so whether that's being pushed around online, on social media, with people trying to discourage our faith or tear us down in any way. We've seen a lot of that. So it could come from our peers, just people that we are associated with. That's one theory. A second theory would be, if you look at history, who have been the worst offenders of religious persecution in history, and I would argue that would be wicked governments, right? If you look at the early Christians under the hand of Rome, they were persecuted. The Jews under Nazi Germany, the saints under the Missouri, the order, anyway, lost my train of thought on the
execution order. Is that what you're talking about?
Looking for.
Yeah, no worries.
Order 66, I was pretty sure that's what it was called.
Yeah. The LDS equivalent of Order 66. Yeah.
The old extermination order.
Yeah. So will this persecution come from a wicked government? Could it be possible that our United States government oversteps its bounds to the point where it's persecuting members of our faith or Christians in general? That's a possibility. In fact, Joseph Smith said of that famous prophecy that the Constitution will hang by a thread. Well, when that happens, what's the result, right? It could be persecution. And so that's another theory. And I guess a third theory would be, in my book, eventually I believe that Satan will establish a one world government among the earth. And those who do not want to be a part of that will have to flee to Zion. Those are going to kind of be the two choices. And so it's possible that that one world government gets implemented to enforce this persecution that Nephi is talking about. But it's, from all other accounts, that seems to show up a little bit later in the storyline. So that's probably the least likely. But those are the three theories that I have as to where this persecution might come from. And it may be a combination of all of them, for all we know.
I think it may probably line up as a combination of all of them, because you see all of those play out in the Book of Mormon. So, and Elder Bednar has said before, the Book of Mormon isn't a book about the past, it's a book about the future. And so there definitely were times like when all of the Christians were gathered up and about to be killed if the sign of the Savior's birth wasn't given on the specified day. Like, that was pretty big persecution there. There was also times when saints were thrown into ovens. There were also secret combinations that were going on. They were warning about secret combinations. I believe it was, who was it? I think it was Ezra Taft Benson, who recommended that members read the book None Dare Call It Conspiracy. Kind of leading into the formation of all of the alphabet organizations that have gotten their way into the government and started, I guess, exerting some influence and control over how we live our life. There's also examples in the Book of Mormon about heavy taxes. I mean, talk about persecution, heavy taxes, man.
Yeah, that could be
that's definitely persecuting people.
Sure,
yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, and I would assume that Satan would try this from all angles, right? Rather than just focusing on one. So it's probably going to be a combination of a lot of things. But eventually, unfortunately, these prophets and apostles don't describe what that's going to look like. They just say it's coming. So be ready for it. But there is some. We have been counseled on how to deal with this, right? And so, if it's okay, maybe I can share a couple quotes that have kind of inspired me on how to get through this phase if and when it does come, and some of the quotes that I put in my book to maybe help others.
Sure.
So first,
real quick, before we get there, Sam, do we have any chats that we need to catch up on? You want to check that out real quick?
Yeah, there's a couple. One specifically from Timber. He said, "How can we know for certain any event?" Do you want me to just read them off?
Read them off. Let's do it.
So he said, how can we know for certain any event can happen in a certain order? I've heard that many of our interpretation or assumptions of the last days are somewhat adopted from evangelical culture.
Yeah, I can address that. So I mentioned hooks at the beginning of the episode. And to me, what a hook was something that placed a sign of the time after or before another sign. So I gave one example, but a second example, we're talking about Nephi's vision. Well, Nephi's going along, and right after this wrath of God is poured out, he says God will remember his covenants with the children of Israel. And then he stops and said, okay, the angel said, I can't write anymore. John's going to tell me the rest, right? So that's a hook to me. That tells me that the things that Nephi is describing happened before the things that John describes. So we go to John's record and kind of fill in from there. But these hooks I found were all over the place. Like there are clues that tell us this sign happens before this sign. Joseph Smith, for example, and they're not all in the scriptures. Joseph Smith said something along the lines that destructions will occur one after another, as did the cholera, desolations, destructions, until the Ancient of Days comes. And he's talking about the Council of Adam-on-Diamond, right? So this tells us there's a destruction period, and then the Council of Adam-on-Diamond happens. So that's just another example of a hook, but they're all over the place. So in my book, I tried not to tell the storyline without placing these hooks together so that we could have a frame of reference and have some sort of confidence that, okay, this is a natural progression of things that are to occur. Of course, I could be wrong on all the stuff that I present in the book, but it's just my, as I sit here today, this is how I understand things to unfold to the best of my ability right here today. And I try to give my reasons and justifications for it in the book.
I love that. It's one of the second coming is one of the things that the saints have specifically been commanded to study. In the Doctrine and Covenants, it talks about how the Lord is saying, study this, look for the signs and the seasons of the second coming. There are basically two segments of members that I come across whenever I talk about the second coming. There are like the deep rabbit hole, tinfoil hat wearing kind of conspiracy theorists that are like, oh, it's all making sense. I'm in that camp. And then there are people out there that are terrified. You got the Relief Society bingo wing ladies that are just like, oh no, I don't like to talk about a second coming. It's too terrifying. You're scaring me. It's like, and the brethren have been coming out saying repeatedly, they've said, the way that you overcome your fear, if ye are prepared, ye shall not fear. The way to overcome the fear is to study the signs and figure it out. So I love that you've done that. I love that you put a book together. There are a handful of other books, and I feel like they help me because on my own, I've tried to study, and I feel like there are times where I miss those hooks. I kind of picture them like corner pieces on a puzzle. It's like, aha, I know where this goes. I know where this goes, and this has to connect to this because this is on the corner.
Right.
And so I love that you're putting this together and can help give the saints some extra study materials. So when it comes to the actual timeline, so what do you believe is before the persecution of the saints and after the persecution of the saints?
So before, I think we're living in it right now. I think what Nephi is describing, there's saints in all the world. Like this is the golden age of the church, right? We're doing missionary work, we're building temples. And then that's the next thing he talks about is this persecution. So I think this persecution, if it's not here already, then it's probably one of the first signs that we'll probably see from here. I mean, I can run through just kind of an outline of the book if you want. So after the persecution, unfortunately, there is this wrath of God that is poured out upon the Gentile nations. So there's going to be a period of destructions and judgments, right?
Well, just real quick, I think that's scripturally founded. I'm getting excited over here because the idea behind that is that you will have the blood of the saints. So if you notice in scripture, there's a pattern. The pattern is God never brings down judgment unless he has blood of righteous people that are screaming out for justice.
Sure.
And so you usually see that happen. So it would make sense that judgment comes after persecution.
Interesting.
For sure.
Yeah. Interesting.
Real quick, before we keep going with those signs, Sam, any more chats that we need to catch up on?
There's two more in particular. One just before Timbers. And I think this is a relatively quick one.
Yeah.
It's from T.O. I don't know what that stands for, but he says, second coming already happened. The Lord appeared to Joseph Smith. This is actually a pretty common one that I've heard from numerous people. So.
Sure. If you want to say that Christ's second coming has come in that form, the only counter argument I would have to that is that if you're going to say that that's part of his second coming appearances, then obviously there's a lot more second coming appearances that he will have before the final one in the clouds of heaven. So sure, I'm okay with saying that was one of his many second coming appearances. Sure.
Like before the parousia, if we're going to use like more terms that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then the last one would be, how do you define when persecutions start when the church has always been persecuted since its inception?
Yeah, that is a great question. I guess it would probably depend on how severe. And of course, this is just me speculating. Like, yes, we have seen persecution since the beginning, but it hasn't always been as intense as it was with the extermination order and so forth. And so I read a few quotes that said that we might see more persecutions than we've had in our past. So there's really no way to judge it based on the quotes that have been given. This is just kind of us looking at it and trying to figure it out together. What does this mean? So yeah, good question.
One theory that I have on that one, so we understand that there are two camps when it comes to second coming theories. There are people that believe that we are still in the sixth seal, and then there are people that believe that we are in the seventh seal. So in the camp of the seventh seal people, they say once the seventh seal has opened, and a lot of them claim that happened in the year 2000, then there was 30 minutes of silence in the heavens. And then after that so they say that 30 minutes, the interpretation of the 30 minutes of silence is a time of withheld judgment, so that there is no judgment, there's no wrath or anything like that. And then after that 30 minutes of silence, then judgments come out. And so it may be that the persecutions start after that 30 minutes of silence, and which then incur the judgments to be brought upon the saints. Could be something like that.
Sure.
And I believe it was Bruce R. McConkie who speculated. He said, are we to understand that the 30 minutes of silence after the seal was opened to be similar to a Kolob timetable? 30 minutes would roughly equate to about 20 to 21 years, is what he said, which lines up with about COVID. And so I had the other guy in my bishopric. He's funny. He's definitely a tinfoil hat guy. He was like, so here's what I think happened. He's like, I think President Nelson was the prophet over the desolating sickness. So he believes that that COVID, the pandemic, was the desolating worldwide sickness, and that is over, and now persecution begins after the sickness. But
yeah, those are all interesting, and I love those theories. I do. In my book, I took a little bit different approach. I do not have the seventh seal opening till much later in the book. The last act of the sixth seal is the 144,000 being called and set apart and sealed. I don't believe that happens till the 10 tribes return, which doesn't happen till Zion's built. Again, these are all hooks that I kind of argue for in the book, and you can kind of trace it back. But yeah, so in my book, I place this in the sixth seal, but I'm fine saying that I could be wrong on that, but that's just my conclusions as of today.
I love that. Yeah. Awesome. Any more chats that we need to catch up on, Sam?
No, I think we're good.
Awesome. Okay. Jeff, any questions? You've been uncharacteristically quiet tonight.
No, I'm just soaking it all in. I was telling Hayden before you got on, I was actually just reading in Helaman today, and it was Samuel the Lamanite, and he's talking to, he's on in Zarahemla, obviously, but he says, but behold, it's for the righteous sake that it is spared. But behold, the time cometh, saith the Lord, that when ye shall cast out the righteous from among you, then shall ye be ripe for destruction. And I don't know, in the wake of the discussion that we're having here and the things that are happening, casting out the righteous among you, the calling of Latter-day Saints, you're not Christian, you're not Christ-like, casting out the righteous, it just, something hit me about that. And it doesn't necessarily equate necessarily to the second coming, because it's talking about the destruction of the Nephite civilization, but I think there's some undertones there in the Book of Mormon. I do have a question, though. If you were to point to some good scriptures that we could go to study, besides your book, where is the best place for us to study these things out? Nephite, you say Lehi's visions, or...
Are you talking about the persecution or the second coming in general?
Just the second coming in general.
Oh, man. I love me a good commentary on the Book of Revelation. Those are always fun. Honestly, if it was me, I would start reading my book, and if there's a reference or footnote that catches your attention, go off on that tangent and search that down and see. I tried my best to put it all in one place so you didn't have to go anywhere else. So I'm biased, but unfortunately, I have found that most of the Second Coming books from an LDS standpoint are very general. And I mentioned this at the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, for example, they'll all mention wars and rumors of wars. We got to keep an eye out for wars and rumors of wars because that's one of the signs of the times. Well, there's been wars and rumors of wars going on since the beginning of time in every nation in the world.
Yeah.
So how does that help us? That's a very general thing to say in a book. And so I try to avoid that at all costs, and I'm not going to talk about generalities, only specifics, because that's what I'm interested in. I wanted to know the storyline, and so I tried to avoid stuff like that. So there's a lot of good, I should go back and say there are a lot of good LDS books on the Second Coming. I've read a lot of them, and they are good. I really like Gerald Lund's the Second Coming of the Lord, and others, but yeah, so other than that, I really like studying people that have actually had visions about it, So studying things that Joseph Smith said, or Heber C. Kimball, or John Taylor had a
What's your
massive.
take on Visions of Glory?
I really like that book, and I do know the person that has had those experiences, and in fact sent him a copy of my book, and so I won't comment too much other than it was an uplifting read for me. So
I got you. So you know Spencer.
not very well, but I'm acquainted with him. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay. What did he think of your book?
Um,
If we're allowed
I,
to say.
I would love to say, unfortunately, I probably shouldn't, if that's okay.
Okay, that's good. That's fine. Yeah, no worries, no worries. Take it easy, Spencer. It's all good. Okay, so yeah, the one question that comes to my mind, just this is a random second coming question. I know that there are a couple of camps when it comes to gathering the lost 10 tribes. Do you believe that are you in the camp of they are somewhere in the earth right now, maybe in the polar ice caps or underwater, or are you in the camp of they are coming from outer space?
Yeah, so first of all, there's two different jobs when we talk about the 10 tribes. First of all, we have to figure out what happened to them, and second, we have to figure out how they return. And there's not a lot of information on either of those. So when in my book, I spend 2 chapters talking about the 10 tribes, and I address each one of those in order. So the first chapter of the 10 tribes, chapter 7, and I talk about their escape or when they fled Assyria. And I think this happened in 605 BC when Babylon conquered Assyria. It allowed the Israelites to escape. That's kind of, in my mind, the best scenario of when they probably would have fled Assyria and journeyed north. So when along their journey north, no doubt a lot of them broke off and scattered and mingled and became lost. That's really not up for dispute. Most people believe that. The question is, was there a main body that stayed together while people were breaking off and settling in? Was there a main body of 10 tribes that kept going to their final destination? And there is a divide on scholars on that issue. Were they all scattered, or were some scattered and some stayed together?
Yeah.
If you look at, well, first of all, we know that there was probably a group 600 years after they left Assyria. So that because Christ visited the Nephites and he said, hey, I'm going to the 10 tribes. Oh, and by the way, one day you'll have their scriptural record. And in section 133, it says they'll bring their rich treasures with them. And some prophets and apostles have interpreted that as them bringing their scriptures that Christ prophesied that they would have.
Right.
And so they were together in a group, at least at that time. And so there's a lot of different theories about what may have happened. And I do go over those main theories in the book and present a couple of them. The thing I want to point out is that the scriptures talk about their return in 2 different ways. Number one, section 110, when Moses brings the keys to Joseph Smith, said that we got the keys for the gathering of Israel from the 4 quarters of the earth and the keys for the restoration of the 10 tribes. Wait, what? So he's talking about 2 different groups. So a lot of people think, oh, he's talking about the groups that were scattered, but also there's this group that remained together, and that's the restoration of the 10 tribes that will return. Or the 10th article of faith has similar language. It talks about, we believe in the literal gathering of Israel from the 4 quarters of the earth and in the restoration of the 10 tribes from the north. Well, that's 2 different groups. And so, and if you read section 133, it sure sounds to me like that's an event that happens. And it says that they return from the north to Zion. So it's not like it's a gradual gathering from here to the second coming. It's like an event, and they're all going to Zion. And so in my opinion, I think there was a group that stayed together. Where they went, that's a mystery. I do present the main theories in the book. I think there's more evidence to conclude that they were taken from this earth like Enoch and Melchizedek were both taken from the earth, and that they will return in a similar way. That fits really good in my mind, but we don't know. So I lay out the main theories of the 10 tribes, but I do have that event returning after Zion is built because of that verse in section 133. They return to Zion. So that's a hook for me. That means that Zion is built, then the 10 tribes return. So scattered Israel is gathering one by one through missionary work now, but the restoration of the 10 tribes will happen all at once to Zion, at least in my opinion.
I love that. Yeah. So there definitely was a loss of identity, and that's what a lot of scholars point to is the lost 10 tribes. So the loss of identity was when the Assyrians came and they just stopped practicing and stuff like that. But there also seems to be, I love that, there does seem to be a group of people. I believe I think it's Michael Rush in his book, Delight in Plainness, talks about the parable, the allegory of the olive tree. And in that, he points out some of the language that's used that indicates that, there were some branches that were taken and hid in the uttermost parts of heaven, while others were grafted into other trees. And so, interesting point there. But yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. I'm tracking. So let's keep going with the signs of the time. So persecution, we are currently in the time of persecution. If we are, what is coming next, and when do we get to building the New Jerusalem?
So the next phase is a judgment phase, and that includes some destructions. And I should preface this by saying 3 Nephi 21 says we have a choice. We could help to build Zion and not be destroyed, or we can fight against God and choose destruction. And that chapter is very clear on what will happen if we choose either one. And so I don't want to sit here and say that these destructions that I describe in the book are absolutely going to happen. I think we still have our agency and can choose otherwise. But if we don't, there will be a period of destructions, natural disasters, plagues, and things of that nature. And a lot of prophets saw that time period in vision, John Taylor being one of them. I quote him. And so that's the next phase. Then Joseph Smith says that right after these instructions, there will be a council of Adam-on-Diaman. It's a very plain quote, the way he phrases it. So I place Adam-on-Diaman occurring after this cleansing phase of the land is cleansed and the wickedness is destroyed a little bit. I place the council of Adam-on-Diaman, and I place it before Zion is built because Bruce R. McConkie said this is the first appearance of Christ. Before he appears in Zion, before he appears on the Mount of Olives, he goes to Adam-on-Diaman first. And so that's one of the reasons I place the Council of Adam-on-Diaman before Zion is built. And I also believe that the Council of Adam-on-Diaman is kind of the key that allows us to build Zion. I think it's kind of God giving us permission to say, hey, I'm going to help you now build Zion. All the keys will be returned to Adam. We'll turn them over to Christ, and he will start implementing his government first among the saints, and then it will spread to the rest of the world during the millennium. But that's kind of the key event that allows us to build Zion. So in my book, I have Adam-on-Diaman occurring, and then the redemption of Zion, and then the 10 tribes return to Zion, and then the 144,000 are called because 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes are called and set apart. And then at that point, we have a period of missionary work where we bring people to Zion, and that's the role of the 144,000. Get as many people into Zion as necessary, because in the book of Revelation, there's these 7 angels that are waiting to pour out judgment and destructions on the earth and plagues, but they're postponing it for this time period to get everyone in.
They're giving everyone one last chance.
Yeah. But once that is up, then those plagues are coming, and you can read about it in Revelation. They sound very terrible. And one of those plagues is the Satan's host of angels will gather together the world for Armageddon. And so that's one of the plagues that are poured out, is this huge war that happens. And then after the Battle of Armageddon, sometime after that, Christ will appear in the clouds of heaven. So that's kind of the structure, the main framework of the book. I have a ton of information on each of these events in the book, but that's kind of how I see it today playing out.
Oh, I love that. Stan, are there any other chats that we need to catch up on?
Yeah, so we have one from AK Otter. He says, "Are there any revelations on Zion, or in quotes, the New Jerusalem will be built?"
Yeah, rephrase that. Is there any quotes on
When?
when?
On
When?
when Zion? Yeah.
Oh, I see.
No, other
Sorry, I
than
can't
it
read.
will be built after a period of destruction. John Taylor, he sees this huge vision of this terrible destruction that happens in the United States, and then right after that, he sees Zion being built, and we have help from angels. They're bringing materials to build the city and the temple, and so that's what he sees right after the destruction. Now, I place Adam on Diabon right in between those two events for the reasons I gave before. But we don't know when this is going to happen. We just know that it's going to happen after this and before this, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think I remember reading that quote. I think John Taylor went into some detail about seeing like different groups of people around the country, and he said like he was in Salt Lake, or I think it was Salt Lake, and he said he could not see anybody. It was like completely desolate. There was nobody around, and then he went through the country and he saw that there was like a group of women that were like together traveling somewhere to the mountains or something like that. And one of the takeaways, I think, from that vision is connected to other scripture that talks about that in the last days, it will be futile to try and fight, to take up the sword and fight with the sword against your fellow man. Because they basically, from what I understand, the second coming texts basically say, like, if you take up the sword, it's not going to go well for you in the second coming, like before the second coming. So the strategy is not to fight, and which, I mean, it's interesting. But I were you about to say something?
Yeah, let the Lord fight your battles. After the Council of Adam on Diamond, I think that's exactly what he will do for us. Prior to that
Right.
time, I think we're probably living similar to where we are now. And we have to kind of go through this destruction and cleansing phase kind of without too many miracles. But after the Council of Adam on Diamond, I think that's when we're going to start to see the miracles that are prophesied of regarding the second coming. So, and that's the number one takeaway that I have from all the research I've done, is that there's so much more for us to look forward to than there is for us to fear. Like, this time period after the Adam on Diamond is just going to bring nothing but joy and comfort to all of us if we learn about it, because there's miracle after miracle that happens.
Awesome. Sam, any other chats that we need to catch up on?
Yeah, so we had a couple. One of them was from Downtime 86 Stars, and he's referencing the allegory of the tame and wild olive trees in Jacob.
Yeah.
And this had to be clarified by Sort of Laban. He says, "What exactly is your question, Downtime? Are you asking how that allegory fits in to the timeline?" And he says, "Yes." So that's what he's trying to reference.
I have to look at that. I know there is a time when they burn the vineyard, right? I can't remember if that's describing the burning of the second coming or at the end of the millennium. It's been a minute since I looked at that in detail. That's a good question. I don't have the answer off the top of my head. I'll have to get back to you.
And then the next question comes from Atomic Rex. He says, "While reading through all the second coming scriptures, how do you decide what is figurative and what is literal?"
Oh, I don't know if you can. That's a really good question. Whenever I'm asked, like, should we interpret this literally or symbolically, or spiritually, I always say, like, well, let's start by the symbolic interpretation first, right? Like, if it's talking about destruction, is it talking about our spiritual destruction? Let's assume that's true first, because usually that's true regardless of if it's literal or not. Does that make sense? And so I usually try to do that with this kind of stuff, is like, yeah, there's spiritual lessons to be learned in all this, so let's at least apply that symbolically. But on top of that, it could also be literal, and I don't know if there's a great way of knowing that for sure. If there was like a specific instance that you wanted me to look at to be like, do you think this is symbolic or literal or both?
So like building the New Jerusalem isn't necessarily going to be symbolic. That's going to be a literal
event, yeah.
Whereas maybe the seals opening is going to be more of a symbolic thing. Is that right?
Yeah, that would be a great example.
Cool. Any other chats?
We're caught up.
Cool.
I got a question though for you.
Yeah.
So I work with the priests at church, and I've got teenagers at home. And, we talked. You're a father. What is the best way for me to teach my children these things about the second coming in a way that they'll understand it and it'll be applicable for them? If you were to give some advice to fathers.
Oh man, that's a heavy question. I have 3 daughters. They're young, and I don't bring this stuff up a lot with them. I let them know like there could be hard times ahead, but we can't let our fear become stronger than our faith. Like those are the types of advice that I give them, and we have to stay close to the Lord, and we have to have a relationship with Him. We have to trust Him. No matter what happens, like that's our priority. So in my opinion, and I can only speak for me personally as a father, I feel like I've been led to not talk about these things in detail with them. Like I don't think it's something that they need to be stressed out about. And maybe it depends on the age. As they get older, they can learn some of these things, but that's just kind of how the Spirit has directed me personally. So that's a great question, and I would definitely pray about it and get your own revelation on how to best handle that.
That's cool. One of the things I wanted to touch down on is, so we oftentimes read that you're not going to be able to know the day or the hour, but you are going to be able to tell by the season. And they oftentimes compare the second coming to a woman who is about to give birth. And so there are contractions, and then there are moments between those contractions of rest, right? And so I'm looking at this, and I'm contrasting it with President Nelson's quotes, because if there was one thing President Nelson did, I would say more than any other prophet before him, it was hammer down urgency and time. A lot of times there were a lot of quotes where he said, in a coming day, it will be spiritually impossible to survive. He mentioned, like, repent now, time is running out. He talked a lot about how we should be prepared for the second coming quickly. There are a lot of people that will say, I believe the second coming is happening probably within the next 10 to 20 years. And then there's another group that's like, no, that's what everyone's always said. It's not going to happen. What camp do you lean towards?
Oh, that's a good question. So I've been bit before, and so I've learned my lesson. I try not to predict anything, and I try not to talk about timing. I just leave that up to the Lord. All I know is I know what has to happen. At least I have a general idea of the things that have to happen. The question is, how quick can we cram those things in, right? What's the least amount of time that this could occur in for the second coming to be right after that? I don't have a great answer, but I think a lot of these things could happen relatively quickly. Like, for example, this destruction phase that I talked about in the book, it doesn't have to drag on for 10 years. Like, it could go, for 6 months and it could be over, and or sooner. Like, it does not, and the Council of Armageddon, and that's a thing that happens in a day or a weekend or whatever. Zion could be built with the help of angels relatively quickly. Like it does not have to be a long, drawn out process. So I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm just of the camp that it's near, that it's these signs are nigh, and so I'm just the purpose of my book is to just maybe wake the saints up a little bit and say, hey, look what. Like we need to prepare, and this will give you an idea of what we should be preparing for. But I don't know. I just know we're one day closer today than we were yesterday. That's my standard answer that I give.
Solid answer. That's a solid answer. But you were led by that Spirit which leadeth men to do good, to compile this book, help wake the saints up a little bit. I love that. I have heard a couple of different theories. One of them that I'm more partial to is the theory about the 7 years of famine and the 7 years of plenty from Joseph in Egypt. And so I've heard that being repeated in the second coming. And there's a close friend of mine who on Sunday, he was like, "Hey, did you notice how long President Nelson served as prophet?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "That was 7 years." And I was like, "Oh boy." And so he's like, he was trying to make the case that we might be going into a 7 year stretch of famine, of hard times, which would include persecution, which would include judgment and stuff like that. But
Sure.
I love your advice is to study these signs for yourself, because if you are prepared, you shall not fear. Because President Nelson also emphasized studying covenants and holding to those covenants, because there's a lot of power in your covenants and in the priesthood. And specifically, he said, only those men that actually take their priesthood seriously will be able to use it to bless their families with the miracles that they need and literally save lives and things like that. So I would err on the side right there with you that I do believe it's going to be sooner than later. Also, because we've never heard prophets speak with as much urgency as President Nelson did. So I would say it's probably, if I were a gambling man, I'd wager sooner than later.
Sure. And I want you to think back of how many times President Nelson talked about the second coming over those 7 years. And how many times when he did he have a smile on his face? I'll bet you it was every single one of them. Like when he talked about the second coming, he was excited for it. And, what does he know that we don't, right? And I just, that gives me a lot of confidence and a lot of joy myself that, we can look forward to this. It's not something we need to fear.
Awesome. Well, cool. Are there any other chats we want to get caught up on, Sam?
I think we're caught up.
Great. Awesome. Well, we are getting close to the hour, so we'll probably wrap it up there. Any other questions, Sam or Jeff, before we wrap up?
Yeah, where can we get the book?
Yeah,
Great
I was just
question.
going to say, so
Great
this
question,
is
yeah.
the book cover. If you go to beforethesecondcoming.com, you can get a book there. And really that site just has a link to Amazon. So that's the easiest place to get there. You can go straight to Amazon and search for it, but I have an earlier edition that was self-published that's not nearly as in-depth as this. And this has a part 2 as well that we didn't even cover today, all about symbolism and the signs, types and shadows of the second coming. It's a really fun couple chapters. So that's part 2 that's not included in the first edition. So if you go to beforethesecondcoming.com, you can order it through there, but you can also download a free chapter at beforethesecondcoming.com. If you just enter your email address, I'll send you a chapter on the Battle of Armageddon, which is a really fun chapter, and you can read all about it, decide if you like it. But thank you very much for having me on. And
100%.
Yeah,
and we may, so be sure to check out his book, but we also, I just posted it today, so we're still collecting feedback. We may be hosting this book as our next book club event in Dads Need Friends. So if you are the average dad, LDS dad, looking for friends, we've got plenty of them for you in our Discord server, dadsneedfriends.com. So check that out, and we would love to get your book in the book club. I posted it out today. We'll see what the feedback is, but we could do potentially some more AMAs. We could study this thing together and get ready for the second coming hand in hand.
Hey,
So,
let me know how I can help. I'd love to be back sometime.
100%. Totally. But until next time, we've got Sam at Through the Mist. Be sure to check out his channel and subscribe. We've got David at Sword of Laban. He was helping us with production today at Sword of Laban. Check him out on YouTube. We got Jeff Borders, the author of the Antichrist Playbook. And we've got Richard Brunson and his wonderful book about the second coming. We've got a link in the description as well, so please check that out. I'm Hayden Holm, and this is Salty Saints. We'll see ya.